being a survey type study, there are some things that we won't look at in detail, but we want to get the whole Old Testament picture in mind. And I think it's really helpful to have the Old Testament picture in the history of the Old Testament in chronological order in our mind as we think about it. And so we're in the book of Exodus, and last week we talked about the 10 plagues. The last thing we talked about last week was, remember, Moses was sent by God. Go to Pharaoh, tell him, let my people go. Pharaoh's not going to do it. A series of 10 plagues was sent upon the Egyptians. The last of them, the worst of them, the death of the firstborn in every household. The Israelites were spared by that, by painting the blood of a lamb or a goat on the doorpost of their house. And when the angel passed over them, when they saw the blood, their houses were spared. The Passover became a mandated annual observance for the Israelites, and it comes from that specific episode. And so when we talk about the Passover, even in the New Testament, when in the days of Christ, when they were observing the Passover, it dates clear back to this time in Old Testament history. All right, so after the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh says, go, get out of here, be gone. And the scripture tells us that they were instructed to ask of the Egyptians for gifts of gold and jewelry and other precious things. And at this point, the Egyptians were so glad to get rid of them, they gladly gave them of their wealth and so forth. And so not only was the country devastated by virtue of the plagues and that last one, the death of the firstborn specifically, but they were also, a lot of their wealth was carried away by the Israelites voluntarily. The Egyptians gave it up in order to get rid of this horrible problem that was upon them. So they're fleeing. But it doesn't, and I asked the question, if you're looking at the study guide, lesson 5, right at the bottom of lesson 5, I asked the question about how many men were there who left, how many Israelite men were there who left when they fled Egypt, coming out of Egyptian bondage. And if you look at chapter 12, verse 37, chapter 12, verse 37 says, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. The English Standard Version there says besides women and children. I think would probably be the right idea. So 600,000 men. If there's even an equal number of women, that's 1.2 million. If they just have one child each, family has just an average of one child, that's 1.8 million. They're very likely, almost certainly, that this, and it says a mixed multitude traveled with them. It wasn't just Israelites. Some Egyptians went with them too. It's very, very likely that this traveling company consisted of over 2 million people. Now, you think about that. And just for a minute, think about the logistical aspect of supplying the needs of that many people. It would have been incredible. Two things would have been particularly urgent: food and water. Food and water. And we're going to read in our study tonight that those things became issues pretty quickly for the Israelites. You got that many people, you got to feed them. You got that many people, they desperately going to have water for themselves and their animals. And so water will become a problem pretty quickly too. Lots and lots of people were together traveling. So what happens? By the way, as they left Egypt, kind of interestingly, look in chapter 13 at verse 20. They took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness, and the Lord went before them in the day by a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And so a miraculous sign that God was with them What would this pillar of cloud look like? How would you distinguish one cloud from another? I don't know. It doesn't say. But there was, I think, something obviously unique about this cloud in the daytime, and a pillar of fire at night would have been, completely unnatural. And so they followed. God led them in that way. Now, it also says there in chapter 13 at verse 17, it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. So if you picture your geographical map from Egypt up into the land of Canaan, there's a pretty direct route there. Go right along the southeastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, and you can go from Egypt right on up into Canaan land. And this says specifically that God was leading them by the cloud and the fire, but he didn't take them the direct route because he thought, clearly God anticipated that they were going to have some issues, and he didn't want them to faint and say, Egypt's just 50 miles back there. We go back to Egypt real easy. And he didn't want them to be able to do that. And so he led them in a more circuitous route. All right, that sort of concludes, we were right near the end of lesson 5 last week, so that sort of concludes that. Any thoughts before we move into chapter 14? Wait.
Yeah. So, I was watching it's called a
documentary.
A documentary on this the other day. And of course, everybody's got their idea of where the crossing of the Red Sea was. But he made some really good arguments.
Can you hold that for just a minute? Let me go do a couple questions, and I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So they're on their way, but they're not going directly. They're going to go from Egypt. They're going to kind of go south down into the Sinai Peninsula, and almost before anything else happens, Pharaoh changes his mind. Pharaoh changes his mind. He's going to pursue them. He just changes his mind. I'm not going to let these people go. You think about it, there probably been a couple of reasons why Pharaoh didn't want to let them go. They were his slave labor force. They were building mighty cities for the Egyptians. Plus, they got a lot of our wealth with them as they're traveling, and he wants them back. And so he's going to pursue them. In chapter 14, verse 1, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, over against Baal-zephon, before you shall camp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So he directed them in a specific place with the very idea that Pharaoh's going to have a hard heart, and he's going to say, I got him. They foolishly got themselves backed into a corner. They're entrapped in the wilderness. I'll be able to easily overtake them. Well, this leads to the very first episode of complaining and murmuring by the Israelites. And they're going to be notorious for this. They are expert murmurers and complainers. And so they've just come out. They've just been led out of slavery. Now they understand that Pharaoh is pursuing them. Look in verse 10, chapter 14, verse 10. When Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in this wilderness. Do you see what just happened there? There was a complete rewriting of the history of this thing. I made a note here. Go back to chapter 4. How did they react when they found out Moses had come to help them get out of this slavery? In chapter 4, look at verse 29. Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel, and Aaron spake all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses, and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked upon their affliction, then they bowed their heads and worshiped. They were very glad. They were praising God. Deliverance has come. So now they run up against their first hardship. The Egyptians are on their tail. The Egyptians are coming after them. We told you, Moses, we told you leave us alone. We would rather just stay here and serve the Egyptians. And you wouldn't let us. You just had to stick your nose in where it didn't belong. And now you got us in all this. Do you see how they rewrote the events? That's not true at all, is it? I'm going to tell you, there's a principle of human nature here, fully on display in the case of Israelites, but we still do it ourselves sometimes. When we do something wrong, when we make a mess, then we try to reimagine it in our own mind to make it sound different than it is, you know. And so this idea of rewriting the history of actual events is a human characteristic that endures. This happened about 3,500 years ago. And yet human nature hasn't changed that much. And people like to rewrite the account to make themselves sound better or to justify their own actions. And that's what the Israelites are doing here. And it's just the first of many episodes in which they're going to gripe and grumble and murmur and complain. And you know, I think the takeaway for us in that is it really looks bad on their part. It's pretty despicable, in fact, to see them griping and complaining like that. How do you think we look when we grumble and complain and murmur and so forth? We don't look any better. And so I think that's a great lesson. It's a negative example, but we can learn from negative examples, and we should. Grant?
One comment. It's interesting how quickly, I mean, they just saw the 10 miracles. It wasn't too long since then, and then now they're complaining.
Yeah. How fast you can forget. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. All right. Now, that leads to I want to let Wade go into some detail about this, but this leads to, so they're up against the Red Sea. You got water in front of you, impassable water in front of you, and you got the Egyptian army behind you. They were in a pretty tough spot. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So in chapter 14, in verse 21, Moses stretched out his hand at the instructions of God. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, and the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned into his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. All right, this is the well-known episode of the parting of the waters, going through on dry ground. Probably almost all of us at one time or another in the past have seen Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments and all that. I don't like those movies. I think they embellish them too much. And if you were going to write a movie script, you'd almost have to do that. You'd have to, supplement some of the information to fill out the story. But I don't like that. I don't like it when they do that. But certainly this is a well-known event. We believe it actually happened. Remember, when we talk about these Old Testament accounts, we think we absolutely believe that we're talking real history here, that this actually happened. The parting of the waters going through on dry ground. Now, I got to repeat this story, and I know many of you have heard me tell it before, but I'm just always reminded of this secular school teacher who was not a Bible believer and told the kids in his class that this was no miracle. This was absolutely no miracle. Everybody knows that the Red Sea in that area where the Israelites crossed was just a shallow marsh. It wasn't more than 6-8 inches deep, and it wasn't a miracle. They just went across that marshy, shallow area there, and it wasn't a miracle. And a little boy in the back raised his hand, and the teacher said, "Yes, what do you want?" He said, I just want to praise God for the miracle." And the teacher said, "I told you it was not a miracle." He said, "No," he said, "I'm talking about the miracle of God drowning the whole Egyptian army in 6 inches of water." This was clearly a miracle, and it was clearly much deeper than 6 inches, right? Now, I want to go to what Wade said, because there's been a lot of study done about where was this Red Sea crossing. Wade, tell us what you were seeing.
The word that the scriptures use there in Hebrew is called Yam Suf. And so, for years, translators have translated that as the Red Sea. But that's not a typical word for red in Hebrew. There's another word for red in Hebrew. Some translators today will translate that as the Reed Sea, which makes people believe that they would have crossed in an area of reeds, like plants that had reeds, would have been a marshy area. But I don't necessarily agree with that, and that would have been probably closer to Egypt. But there is a couple different, probably more than a couple different ideas about that. When you're looking at the map, the Gulf of Suez, I know you got a map up there, but the Gulf of Suez.
So the Red Sea comes up like this, and the Gulf of Suez goes to the left, and the Gulf of Aqaba goes to the right.
Yeah. So the Gulf of Suez was more the traditional area that people thought that they crossed in. But there's some ideas that's been passed on now that they may have actually didn't cross in the Gulf of Suez. They may have come down further and crossed in the Gulf of Aqaba, which I seem to like that better than the other one. There's interesting that several years ago, back in the 70s, there was a guy that was doing research on this, and he had found an area where they would have actually been pinned in, just like the scripture says, that come right into the sea of the Gulf of Aqaba, and there was a monument that had been placed there, like a round column. And then on the other side, there was a round column too. Now the other side, the round column on the other side had been taken down. But it had words like Solomon, and like Solomon had put it up there. That, to me, that I favor that crossing more than I would the other ones. But
yeah, there's been tons written about this, and you can find favorable arguments on both counts. Part of it has, and part of that is due to the fact that they don't know exactly where Mount Sinai was.
If you went to the Gulf of Aqaba, that would put Mount Sinai in Arabia.
Yeah, right. Instead of in the Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
The sort of the traditional view of where Mount Sinai was right down in the tip of the Sinai Peninsula. But this alternate view, I was reading that there are 6 places. They're like 6 most popular speculations, maybe is what about which of those mountains is Mount Sinai. Some in the Sinai Peninsula, some over in Arabia, and again, nobody knows for sure. But that would dictate somewhat about where this crossing was. I don't think it matters to us to know, because the fact of the matter is nobody does know. No, you just can't say for sure. But I think Wade's point's a good one, is that we should not be too argumentative about where this crossing happened or where Mount Sinai was necessarily, because knowledgeable people make arguments all around that thing.
One thing I think, of course, God could have done anything he wanted to, but it just seems by the narrative, and just like the joke that you just told, God could have drowned the Egyptian army in 6 inches of water. He could have done it, but I don't think he did.
Right.
I think that this was notable walls.
It says a wall of water.
It
like
actually
you said.
says that in
Yeah.
Scripture, a wall of water. Yeah. But I think that this would have been over their heads.
Yeah, oh, yeah, well, I think so too.
So have you ever heard or read any articles wherein the archaeologists have supposedly discovered remnants in the bottom of the Red Sea at various places? Maybe some argue that they found something like this in the Gulf of Aqaba, some in the Gulf of Suez. Maybe war implements, broken down chariot wheels, and even skeletal remains maybe of the soldiers who were drowned when the waters closed back up. There's been a number of articles written about that. I just want to advise, be very, very careful about citing those, because they have been thoroughly debunked. Those claims started about, maybe almost 50 years ago, 30 to 50 years ago. And it was a spoof. It was a satire. And legitimate news organizations picked up on it thinking it was real, and it wasn't. And so, could archaeologists, and again, it'd be pretty challenging, because we're talking about down in the depths, right? It'd be pretty challenging to find. What if they did find? Well, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. Our faith doesn't depend upon them being able to find the remnants of the Egyptian army. I believe that happened, and if they found broken down chariot wheels, it wouldn't change to one degree whether I believed it more or less. I believe it. I believe it happened just like the account said. But those stories of having found evidence of the Egyptian army at the bottom of the Red Sea, one place or another, though that started out as a spoof years ago, and it got picked up as a legitimate news story, and it's been real thoroughly debunked. But yeah, I was looking on just today, and you can still find websites that are making that claim and even posting supposed pictures from the bottom of the water of chariot wheels and so forth. Just be advised, very, very unlikely that those are true. And I actually think that when we try to present evidence that has been disproven, we actually hurt our own case. We don't need that. We don't need that archaeological evidence in order to believe what the Bible says. So just be kind of careful with that. Any thoughts or comments here? Anybody? Karen?
Somebody was mentioning before about walking through like a marsh, which to me would mean there was some dampness to it, but it says in at least 2 places that the Israelites walked on dry land.
Yeah, Sarah?
I had seen some research that had been done. We talked earlier about there being about 2 million people.
Yeah.
That for them to be able to cross in a single night, that they would have to be 1,000 people abreast, and it would have to be 3.5 to 5 miles wide.
Good point. I hadn't thought about that. So
This wasn't a path like this aisleway right here. To get that many people across, it's going to have to be a huge dry land path across the sea. Good point.
And also in Psalm 77, it talks about the crossing, and it talks about it being a tremendous thunderstorm, and rain pouring from the sky, and lightning, and all that. And still at the same time, the Israelites crossed on dry ground, so they were covered while all of them were around them.
The New Testament, and I didn't even write down where, the New Testament talks about them being baptized in the water. And Josh, read that, Jeff.
All right, let me go with it.
You had it in mind. You're better than me.
No, I don't know, but already, 1 Corinthians 10, it says, if I can get my pages turned, moreover, brethren, I would not have you be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea,
Yeah.
and all did eat the same spiritual meat.
So baptized in the cloud and the sea.
Immersed.
They were under the water,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay. All right.
So, the miraculous deliverance of the Israelites and the destruction of Egypt. You know, all accounts indicate that we were talking about when when Joseph was elevated to high rank, number 2 man, just under Pharaoh. We were saying that Egypt was very likely the richest, most powerful nation in the world at that time. And almost overnight now, they are not. They have been devastated by virtue of what has happened. The plagues were devastating to the land of Egypt. And now the whole army has been destroyed in this event at the Red Sea. They're wrecked, they're ruined. And actually, they never really recover from that. They never regain that status as a world superpower that they probably had before this all happened. So kind of interesting there. All right. So let's skip over into chapter 15, and we have another. So we've already heard about the Israelites just in a really despicable way complaining against Moses, and by the time we get to chapter 15, they're at it again. In chapter 15, verse 23, when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah because they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried unto the Lord. The Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance in these, and there he proved them. And he said, "If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of those diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee." And so their next complaint, after they complained about what are we going to do now? We can't get across the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are right on our tail. They got delivered by that. They got miraculously delivered by that. And this point was made just a minute ago. They were complaining about being trapped at the Red Sea when they had just seen the 10 plagues in Egypt. Now they got miraculously delivered across the Red Sea, and the next thing they're doing is complaining because they don't have any water. They're just a complaining people. And the more you read it, again, I think the more despicable they become. They're just bad. You don't think God, who could get us across the Red Sea and drown the whole Egyptian army in the Red Sea, you don't think God can't give us some water? They're not thinking that way. And so they're complaining. And in this instance, the water was provided by God. Showed Moses a particular tree. When he cast it into the bitter water, it became sweet, and they could drink it. I don't know the chemistry of that. I don't know whether I would argue, I probably would, but I don't know if I could prove it, whether this was a miraculous thing or not. Clearly, God showed Moses the tree, so in that sense, there was certainly divine intervention. If somebody knew of that tree on their own and put it in the bitter water, would it have treated it chemically to make it palatable? I don't know. But again, God is providing for them, and he promises that he will. If they keep his will and do his ordinances, he will be with them. So, again, another incident of their complaining. They're not done complaining. Chapter 16, in chapter 16 at verse 1, they took their journey from Elim. All the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Now they're complaining almost immediately again. Just complained about water, they got water. Now they're complaining about food. We're starving. Oh boy, I remember how great it was back in Egypt. And we sat around those just pots full of fresh meat. We could just eat meat and bread to the full. We had it so good. Oh man, I wish. Look, Moses, what you've done. You took us away from that and you brought us out here and we're starving to death. There's that rewriting history again, right? Absolute rewriting of history. And so, of course, with this complaining comes the manna. Verse 16:4. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. It shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And Moses and Aaron said unto all the children of Israel at even, Then ye shall know that the Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning then ye shall see the glory of the Lord, that he heareth your murmuring against the Lord, and what are we that ye should murmur against us? And Moses said, This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread in the full. For that the Lord heareth your murmurings which ye murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. And so Moses spake to Aaron, saying to the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he hath heard your murmuring. It came to pass, as Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud, and the Lord spake to Moses. So he gives them regulations in verse 16. This is the thing which the Lord commanded, Gather of it every man according to his eating, an omer for every man according to the number of your persons. Take ye every man for them which are in the tents. So an omer, by all accounts, an omer is about somewhere between 1.5 to 2 quarts. So you can kind of envision that. It wouldn't be, might be sort of equivalent to a 2-liter Coke bottle, a 2-liter Coke bottle of this manna for every person in the household. So if you got 6 or 8 in your household, you'd have quite a bit gathered. But notice verse 17: the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. Moses said, Let no man leave of it till morning. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was wroth with them. Again, they're not doing what they're told, right? And God, this is amazing. God is providing for them miraculous food that all they have to do is go out and gather it, right? And simple rules to observe. They don't keep even the simple rules. And of course, when they don't keep God's rules, it doesn't go well for them. There was a rule about the Sabbath day. It says, verse 23, he said, This is that which the Lord has said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye shall bake today, and seethe that ye will seethe. And that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept till the morning. And they laid it up till morning, as Moses had bade, and it did not stink, neither were there any worms therein. And Moses said, Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there were some that went out of the people on the 7th day to gather, and they found none. So, again, clearly the hand of God is in this. If you try to keep this overnight, normally, it's gonna stink. It's gonna rot and ruin. You can't keep it overnight. It's not possible. On Friday night, you do keep some over. You keep enough over for the next day, and that night it does not stink, and there are not worms in it the next day. How come? Obviously, the hand of God is in this as he's miraculously providing this food for the Israelites. But again, they show their stubborn, disobedient hearts, even in the manner in which they were told to take of the manna. They are a rebellious, hard-hearted, stubborn, ungrateful people, to be sure. I asked you the question 5, how long did the manna last? It lasted for 40 years. Go to chapter, what have I got written down here? I see it here somewhere. 1635, in chapter 16, verse 35, the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years until they came into the land inhabited, and they did eat manna until they came into the borders of the land of Canaan. So, this was not just a one-time event. It was something that continued for 40 years. Here again, there are skeptical arguments against the biblical account. Because, skeptics desperately want to explain away the miracles. Any Bible miracle, any place that the Bible suggests anything supernatural, skeptics want to explain that away in some natural way. And so you may have read somewhere that in this part of the world, there's a phenomenon that's seen from time to time wherein a fungal growth, maybe sort of like mushrooms, grows in certain times of the year under certain specific conditions. And that, they say, probably was the manna. It wasn't from God and it wasn't a miracle. It was probably just this peculiar thing that happens in that part of the world occasionally from time to time. Well, there's a lot wrong with that kind of a naturalistic explanation. First of all, this says it happened constantly for 40 years. I don't even think the skeptics are going to try to argue that there's something like that going on continuously. All the arguments I've ever heard is that it has been noted from time to time occasionally that this sort of thing happens. Secondly, how do you account for that business that you can try to keep it overnight any day of the week and it's gonna stink and breed worms, but on Friday night into Saturday you can keep it overnight and it will not stink and breed worms? How do you figure that? If it's just a natural occurrence, how are you going to figure that? It just doesn't work, does it? Really, every time a skeptic or a doubter tries to produce a naturalistic explanation for a miraculous, they always fail. They always look silly when they do that. Thoughts or comments, anybody? Grant?
The only comment I'd make there is, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty. The skeptic doesn't understand God is the Almighty.
Yeah. This was no challenge to God's power at all. Exactly right. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, that's just observation. They also have the quail to explain away. In the morning they were eating bread, and in the evening they were eating quail, and it seemed to be they were covered up in quail too. So that'd be a really odd phenomenon to explain as well.
Yeah, exactly right. We'll get to that quail episode too here in just a little bit. I think you're right. So the next murmuring is in chapter 7. Almost chapter by chapter we have instance of the children of Israel murmuring, right? Chapter 17, verse 1. All the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why chide you with me? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses. Now in this instance, verse 5, the Lord said unto Moses, go ye before the people, and take with thee the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river. Take in thy hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempt the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? And so, again, water was an issue. It's not the first time water's been an issue. Water and food. Remember what we said earlier? You got that many people. It's going to take train car loads of food to feed them every day. And it's going to take unbelievable amounts of water, food and water, food and water. These are going to be critical things to a traveling band of people that numbers almost certainly at the 2 million plus level. So what's the population in Nashville? About 500,000, maybe a little more than that. But just think of the city of Nashville. Think of the whole city of Nashville, and everybody in it has got to march to Miami, Florida. Can you imagine the logistical issues associated with a band of people that large moving like that? That's what you're dealing with here. And so when we read the Bible account, it perfectly tells the story. But I think we're tempted to underestimate all the challenges and difficulties that would have gone along with that. Wade?
Follow them.
They left a pretty good
They
trail.
left a pretty good trail.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Anybody else? All right. Now, the last part, and we just got a few minutes. Maybe we can get this in chapter 17. The last part of chapter 17. It says, then came Amalek. So the people of Amalek. We often talk about the Amalekites, right? That's these people, right? That's who this is. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on one side and the other on the other side. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and so on. There's something said there in verse 14. Moses, I want this to be remembered. And I'm going to wipe out the memory of the Amalekites. I want this remembered. Make a note about this because I don't want this to be forgotten. Now, why was that intensity of God's wrath kindled against the Amalekites? Well, and you might want to put this note in your margin. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, we've got a little additional information that we don't have in the original part telling of that story. In Deuteronomy 25, verse 17, Deuteronomy 25:17, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land that the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, and thou shalt not forget it. So what the Amalekites did, which was God so despised it, is they didn't come with a frontal assault on the Israelites. They came from behind. And we talked about this huge traveling band of people. And the elderly, the weak, the sick, the feeble are going to kind of straggle behind, right? And the Amalekites were coming and picking them off. They weren't fighting the fighting men up front. They were picking up the stragglers from behind, and God hated that. And he said, I want this to be remembered. And when you come into the land and possess it, and when you have peace all around, I want you to take care of the Amalekites. When did that happen? King Saul, right? Remember, King Saul was told, 1 Samuel 15, go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Why? Why, God? Why should we go and utterly destroy the Amalekites? Right here is the story. And so, let's see if I can get a note on the amount of time there. We're talking about 500-ish years, on the order of 500 years later, God, through Samuel, told King Saul, go and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Okay, thanks everybody. We're out of time. Lord willing, we'll pick up our study there next week.